Well, amen. We're live. Quick word this morning, in between jobs here, and just thought I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it's a good word for people that may be struggling or in bonds to some sort of sin, and maybe they feel hopeless and they feel like they're calling on God, but they're not. God's not answering, and um, I think this is a really good story. We find it out of Genesis. It's in chapter 20. We see in the beginning of chapter 20, it says, "And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and journeyed to Gerar. Sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said to him, Behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister? And she, even she herself, said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her." And that's really the end of what I want to read here. And so here we see Abraham. This is the second time now that he's lied about Sarah being his wife. And, it's actually almost like a half truth. He says that Sarah is the daughter of his father, but not the daughter of his mother. So Sarah is really almost like a half sister to Abraham. But really what he was doing is being manipulative. He didn't want to die at the hand of this king, because because it says that Sarah was fair to look upon and things like that. But the thing I wanted to focus on here, and the reason I think this is relevant, because a lot of times we'll talk to people, and I've even experienced this myself, where we'll be looking for deliverance from something, some sin. And this was something for a long time I dealt with for a long time, even as a professing Christian, with things like pornography and lust and masturbation and things like that. And you'd call out to God, and people would tell you, oh, call out to God, pray, and we do these things, and at least I was doing these things, and there was really there seemed to be no deliverance from it. But the question I want to ask you today, if you're in that situation where you're in a place where you've been in this sin for a long time, and you're just looking for God, you're really truly looking for God to deliver you. The key here is Abimelech said to the Lord, he said, in the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. So Abimelech's heart, he had integrity. He was in it. He really believed that Sarah was not married. He really believed that they were being honest. He said, Abraham said she was his sister, and Sarah said that Abraham was her brother. And because of that, God said, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. So we see God saw the integrity of Abimelech's heart, the innocency of his hands. And because of that, it says that God kept him. It says, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now, this is not a Calvinist type, like these people are just robots and they don't have free will. God can keep us from sin, but we need to have the integrity of heart, the innocency of hands. If you're struggling with something, men, if you're struggling, or women, with something like lust, but you continue to look, on Facebook at inappropriate pictures, if you continue to look at women as they're walking by and lusting after them, there's no integrity of heart there. There's no innocency. You're really guilty. You're continuing to participate in that sin. Let's say you have a problem with drinking. I'm just going to go hang out at the bars. There's no innocency of hands. There's no integrity in heart, and we can't necessarily count on God at that point to deliver us. But when you get to that point where you truly want deliverance, and you're truly in innocency in your heart, you truly desire to have integrity, you look back, and I truly believe, I love holiness. I love holiness churches. I love holiness talk. I love holiness conversations. But I think sometimes in that realm, sometimes we can get too caught up on the us part of it. It says here that God kept Abimelech. Yeah, his heart was in the integrity of his heart and innocency of hands. But at the end of the day, it was God that kept him from going near to Sarah. It kept him from sin. And I bet you if we look back, the times that God keeps us as we desire him, as we follow him, as we seek him and really desire to live for him, the amount of times, even us that think we're just so great, that God, it is really God that has kept us from sin. And once again, I don't say this with a Calvinist twist of this, just do what you're going to do because God's going to do what he's going to do. God's in control, and whatever's going to happen happens. No, there's all throughout the scriptures, we see man's part and we see God's part. Even in salvation, we saw it at Jericho, with man's part was to march around the city for 7 days, and it wasn't the vibration of their walking that caused the walls to fall down. But if they had not done that, God would not have caused the walls to fall down. We see it really all throughout scriptures. Man's obedience, the story of Gideon, so these kind of, in man's eyes, foolish battle plans. But Gideon had his part. God's part is immensely greater, but nevertheless, man has his part. And the same is true here. Abimelech had his part of having an integrity of heart and innocency of hands. But even with that, we saw later on that in verse 17, it says, "So Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. For the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." So even in this time of innocency and integrity, and really not knowing that Sarah was Abraham's wife, there was still judgment coming upon Abimelech's household. That God fast closed up the wombs of the women, and but with the contrite heart and the broken heart and a contrite spirit, that Abraham prayed for them, and God brought healing. So a couple of things when we're approaching these areas that you may be struggling with, and I use that word carefully because most people that say they're struggling with sin really aren't struggling. They're giving into it full on, and they're just using it as an excuse. But if there's something that you're really struggling with God, because I've been there, I've been in those places, and make sure your heart is right. Make sure you have innocent hands. Make sure you're really desiring to live for God, and allow God to keep you from that sin. And two, God brought judgment to the house of Abimelech. Even though there was the integrity and the innocency and the lack of knowledge that Sarah was Abraham's wife, there was a judgment brought by God still to the house of Abimelech. And ultimately, God, he brought healing as well. But I think we need to understand too, before we know Christ, before we're walking with Jesus, a lot of us lived in grave sin, great sin. And a lot of times there's judgment for that, even as born again Christians now, and walking with God, we can still reap what we sow from times past. So give everything to God, walk with integrity of heart, innocency of hands, and